All right, let's get started to this Material H solo raid team guide. So boss is pretty much weak to wind, but there's basically only just Black Scarlet on it that is usable. There's other wind units, but as you guys know, there's not that are really good. Guilty is wind DPS, but then she is a shotgun, and its shotgun's kind of bad at this boss. Fierce is good, so like Red Hood, Snow White, Maxwell, things like that. Rocket launcher does do AoE, so and that's also useful for dealing with the missiles that kind of just get over you and they kind of deal more damage to you over time. It is pretty annoying to kind of deal with them if you don't have like a rocket launcher or any other kind of AoE to deal with them. Machine gun, what they have recommended in the fight, it does core damage pretty consistently. The way they designed machine gun against this boss fight was that they put the shield on the mobs, and then expected to use the machine guns on those. AoE burst, which is pretty much like the crucial point that I'm gonna be talking about, is pretty useful for clearing the mobs. I'll talk about more of it in detail. And then pretty much just healer. So there's like 3 different things that we need to just pay attention to. One is talking about the quick time event, which is I'm gonna call it QTE, which is the red circles. Basically, the game plan on that is to delay the quick time event as much as possible because the last phase is pretty deadly and there's gonna be like a bunch of AoE lasers to that. The second thing is to kill the mobs ASAP before they gain a shield, where it's more reliant on hit count. Now there's different ways to deal with the mobs that I'm gonna talk about, and then the third is pretty much having a healer. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the mob shield mechanic. Every so often throughout the fight, Material H receives Iron Shield, which only wind can damage and spawns mobs. Once the mobs stop moving, they will get the shield that basically makes all the damage they take 1. In response to that, the enemies would also have lower HP. In this situation, that's where they decided to take advantage of machine gun, because machine gun have high hit count, then you can take advantage of that. However, during this time, while Material H Iron Shield is up, and while the mobs are still alive, it will keep firing laser. And after a while, the mobs do despawn, but if you do get to this point during the challenge mode, you'll likely have received a lot of damage from the laser. So your goal is basically to destroy the mobs as soon as possible so that you don't take damage from laser. So then now let's talk about the delayed burst AoE mechanic that we are going to take advantage of. The thing is, there are some Nikke bursts that doesn't register their burst damage immediately the moment it is cast. So for example, the drunk regular Scarlet or Yulha, there's a few seconds, milliseconds before the burst explodes. We'll take advantage of this mechanic to go around the mob shield mechanic. The situation here is basically if you cast your delayed burst AoE before the mobs put their shield up, but then it explodes right after the shield is up, then the mobs will take full damage as if they have no shield. But since their HP updates to lower HP, then even a weak burst AoE would destroy them. So here are some ways that we can deal with the mobs. Either 1, have a burst AoE with enough damage to kill the mobs before even the shield is up. So typically your DPS here, Scarlet, Haran, those that have strong DPS AoE. Another is using a burst AoE where you time your burst cast before the shield happens, but it explodes right after it happens. Common examples here would be Summer Helm, Yulha. Scarlet technically is also a delayed burst. Noir, Diesel, Ludmilla, Exia, Freema. I have a bunch of other examples that I'll show you in the guide sheet. Third way to deal with the mobs is either by distributed damage. One way is using Scarlet Black Shadow's third proc, and then the other is Dorothy's burst. Note that with 2B's distributed damage, it is not effective, and it's better to consider it more as a number 1, which is more kind of like the burst AoE, where you're looking for enough damage to kill the mobs instead of just as a distributed damage. For Dorothy, however, her brand has to have accumulated some damage first before it will trigger, and the downside on it is it has huge delay. Overall, Dorothy is not as much practical 2B, you kind of just consider her as just having the high damage burst. And so realistically, it's primarily just Scarlet Black Shadow that is really useful on this boss in particular regarding the distributed damage. Number 4 is kind of what Shift Up really want us to do is to use the machine gun or some rapid fire to burst to deal with a lot of hits when the shield is up. Alright, so now that we talked about it, let's talk about here the units that are kind of the main choices. So what we have here are kind of the main DPS choices. We have the Scarlet, Alice, Maxwell, Red Hood, Ludmilla, the usual typical meta units. And then some of the sub units that could be used as well. I will add more to this as I find more, but these are the ones that I could think that are actually kind of useful. And here are the samples of the units that have delayed AoE burst. There are some in burst 3, there are some in burst 2, some in burst 1 category, and so you can actually use and take advantage of them. Here are the ones with instant AoE burst that is kind of worth mentioning. You could try to use these, but just keep in mind that you would probably need a little bit more damage or maybe some overload or other buffers to go alongside so that they can kill the mobs. And then here are the other 2 that I wanted to talk about that actually I found kind of useful. Summer Anise and Small White are actually useful in dealing with the mobs. Summer Anise's targeting on her skill 2 is going from left to right, so you can manually target the right side while the Summer Anise's skill 2 is hitting the left side. And then for Small White, she does, whenever she's bursting, she can pretty much just handle the mobs, destroying the mobs easily. Now let's talk about the 5 teams that I think that are pretty good right now. So we have the Tia Naga as pretty much usual, and the Scarlet Black Shadow alongside with Alice is definitely the top picks in there. We've mentioned this already before, but Tia Naga, you kind of want to put your highest DPS units in there based on the boss. So typically in that situation, then we would put our pretty much only win DPS that is meta right now, which is Scarlet Black Shadow, and the best buffer for her, which is Alice. If you don't have any of those, or maybe you didn't invest on Alice, you could try to change it with Maxwell or Ludmilla or Red Hood, or just whichever one that are kind of meta. And again, just kind of refer to the meta units that is there. Now the second team is pretty much the bunnies. It's pretty straightforward what you want to put in the bunnies. It's like Modernia and Maxwell, but you can just slap in again pretty much any other unit that you have invested and that are meta also. For the third team, it's basically the Summer Anise team, and for this one in particular, you can pretty much like slap in any healer. I think any healer could work actually, but the most common one, obviously, because we're taking advantage of PvT's max ammo reduction, would be Marciana, and that would keep the units alive. But there's also the usual Biscuit Poly team. You add Biscuit and then Poly, or Biscuit and Mass, Biscuit and Quincy, or what have you, other burst 2 that is actually useful. Since Biscuit is a 40-second unit, you will need another burst too. There is also another, so if you don't have like Marciana or Biscuit, again, I mentioned any healer. I tried with Helm also. You can use Helm with these units and just have another burst too alongside with it. That is like 20 seconds. And then another one is, as usual, the Snow White team comp. The Yulha team comp actually is pretty good against this boss in particular, because Yulha's burst actually does time well with the mob spawning, and then alongside with it, when Snow White is bursting, you actually have Yulha's buff alongside also that goes along. So Yulha is actually the more preferred team with Snow White in this situation. And then for the healer, you can put in either Helm, or you could put in a Noise or Rapunzel. I kind of found those to be the useful ones. And then finally, the Team 5s. Team 5 is actually pretty flexible, and as you've noticed, we actually haven't even used Red Hood or Ludmilla yet, or even Novel. So these units are actually pretty much like what we would use whatever we have left. Summer Helm, Dala, or Sakura for the cooldown reduction. And then if you do use Sakura, typically Sakura and Helm do come hand in hand together. But then the healer, Summer Mary or Pepper, those units are useful. Unfortunately with Pepper, she is not as strong of a healer unless you manual with her. But I have found it useful also. There are some people that have used Pepper also. And then there's also the 2B. 2B is useful in this one because she can actually act as a tank, because the boss do target the highest attack, or otherwise she can be taunted as well. So 2B and Noise do act as like a tank, and it's useful if you use her with Scarlet because it will avoid targeting Scarlet instead. Otherwise, there's also A2, which is good for clearing the mobs. But yeah, those are the teams that I kind of just want to use. And as mentioned before, just delay the QTE as much as possible, kill the mobs ASAP, and either have a way to deal with the mobs, and then finally just have a healer, because that will just like make your life easier. Alright, that's about it. Those are the units and teams that I want to talk about, and I'll add more on this guide comp as usual as needed. Good luck, and I'll see you guys next time.